Hello, USC football fans. Connor Morrissette and Chris Trevino of USCfootball.com. Chris, spring practice number 1 for USC is in the books. We were here and we have a lot to share with our audience. Let's start with some of the players who came out of the tunnel. Maybe even before that, the Bears general manager and head coach were here. Ryan Poles, the GM, and Matt Eberflus were here hanging around campus ahead of USC's Pro Day tomorrow. That sort of started what we saw at the tunnel. A lot of stuff going on today, but that was my first takeaway. The Bears are going all out for Pro Day tomorrow.
All out for Pro Day. Yeah, a lot going on. We see all the former Trojans that are preparing for Pro Day to go on tomorrow, walking back and forth. We saw Caleb Williams, just casually the number 1 pick, walking around, as you said, the Bears GM and their coach here to see him. But Tunnel Day, that's what I call it, first day of camp, because we want to see how much their bodies have grown for these guys. We want to see the freshmen. Everyone's out there early. There's a lot of excitement. I feel like maybe the buzz was a little bit quieter than it was last spring. I mean, we could talk about that a little bit, but yeah, just seeing all the guys come out. You know, the roster dropped yesterday. We were putting out new weights online, on Twitter, on social media, and guys have gained weight for the most part. You know, a lot of those big beefy defensive linemen, we got to see them. We got to see the freshmen. For me, off the top, the jaw dropper of the group was, Cameron Fountain, the freshman, 6'6", 256 pounds, I believe. He's only gotten bigger since he got here on campus. Was a guy at the All-American Bowl in January that really turned heads. He's put on a couple pounds, and just that length, and you can see why guys recruit out of the SEC. They are just built different in the South, and watching him walk up, you were just like, that's a freshman, oh my God. So he was the jaw dropper for me, Cameron freshman, kind of like what Braylon Shelby was last year as a freshman. Braylon Shelby still physically impressive. You're hoping he takes that jump as that offensive line, outside linebacker, defensive end in this Dan Tillman scheme. But Cameron Fountain jumped out to me right away. What about you?
Absolutely, for me as well. And Greg Biggins, our friend, tweeted, when we talk about guys being different from the South, these are the bodies we're talking about. He quote tweeted your video, Cameron Fountain. Jamil Muhammad looked bigger to me. I thought he was thicker. Cade Eldridge looked a little bit bigger to me. Isaiah Rake's first impression of him was he's a wide body, a wide load. It's going to be tough to block him. Opposing offensive lines, he's of course, the defensive lineman transfer from Texas A&M. And Lincoln Riley said on Trojans Live yesterday, the defensive line group, I think it was either 320 or 340 pounds as a unit since January that they've gained. So the beef is here, Chris, and we'll see what it looks like on the field. But so far, so good. Those are a couple of guys that stood out to me in the tunnel as well. And let's get to practice. So we see Danton Lynn working with the cornerbacks a little bit. The new defensive coordinator for USC. It was awesome to watch Matt Entz work with the linebackers and Eric Henderson work with the defensive line. It was just a new look, a lot of similar drills from what we've seen in the past for USC, but some new faces. And what were your takeaways overall from what we got to see at practice? A little bit longer than usual today, too, which was great.
A little bit longer. They're a little bit kind to us on the first day of spring. Give us a little bit more. I was really interested to see how practice was going to look different now, knowing there's a new defensive staff in place. They got the team drills pretty much the exact same that we've seen. The returners going on, a little bit different because Dato Field not in the background. We're looking over there. You can hear the construction going on. So all that going on. But yeah, right after team drills broke, they broke into, this team rip drill. Offensive line went into the back corner, but the defensive backs, wide receivers, started doing that drill, which we haven't seen. That's new for them. And then defensive line went with Eric Henderson and Sean Nua and did some get-off drills as a position group. And there was a lot of pace to that drill. And then right after that, they broke into defensive into their groupings, DBs here, linebackers there. And I spent most of my time watching the linebackers and defensive line. I know those are two big spots that need improvement for next season. Obviously, Eric Henderson was leading that group. I know Sean New was working with him, but you could tell from the drill they were running, Eric Henderson was the one leading it. You saw every defensive lineman there. Usually last year you'd have the rush ends, defensive line. No, everyone was together, defensive ends, defensive tackles, nose tackles, all of them together working with Eric Henderson and Sean Nua. So got to see some of those guys moves. Really impressed with Nate Clifton, the Vanderbilt transfer, 6'4", 290 pounds, moved pretty well for that size, and he just looks like a guy, who's played a long time in college. He's a redshirt senior, played multiple games at the SEC. I was really impressed with him coming out. And then Matt Entz, impressed us at the media day for him, and he's so commanding when he's on the field. He has that booming voice out there. I'm sure he was loving this weather compared to South Dakota, but just a booming voice and very commanding when he was running those drills. So those are kind of the two things I noticed.
I was watching the linebackers too, and we saw Mason Cobb and Easton Mascarenas-Arnold take the first reps in a drill, and that's something that we talk about a lot, the rep hierarchy. So those were the first two guys out of the gate, and then Rajon Davis was behind them, and one of them, Eric Gentry, a little further behind. But that's sort of how Eric Gentry likes to play things, so we can't take too much away from that. But I did think it was interesting, Cobb and Mascarenas-Arnold. Cobb a captain last year, Mascarenas-Arnold maybe a potential captain this season. We'll see. Lincoln Riley shouted him out on Trojans Live for his leadership. That stood out to me. The defensive backs, I didn't get a chance to watch them too much, but Jalen Smith, he just looks so quick. If you watch the video that Ryan put up, because he was watching more of the defensive backs than we were, Jalen Smith, he just stands out to you, just his quickness, and I think he's going to play a big role in the defense. Overall, though, we don't get to see a lot of live stuff in the practice, so those are really it for my takeaways. Anything else before we move on?
I mean, just looking at the defensive back room, so deep. Just
Yeah.
look at all those defensive backs. It's the deepest room probably on the team, just between the safeties and then the cornerbacks and then guys who can go both ways. Jalen Smith is a guy who could play cornerback, nickel, or safety. He could do whatever you need him to do. So they actually have to break them up into 3 different groups. That's how many bodies they have in that room. Taylor Mays and Bookie Radley-Hiles was working with the safeties. Danton Lynn was working with one cornerback group, and then Doug Bell was working with another cornerback group. I thought it was really interesting that Danton Lynn was working with kind of developmental guys, kind of the younger guys. I thought that was really interesting. He's a guy who loves teaching and working with young people, so I was a little surprised to see it, but I think that's a great quality to have as a defensive coordinator. I want to work with the young guys. I want to get them up to speed. He talked about how they were going to be slow and install and learning, so I think that was a good sign to see him get his hands dirty with some of the younger guys like Marcellus Williams, the freshman, Malachi Crawford, the redshirt freshman, and Prophet Brown, who was a reserve last year but played really well in that Holiday Bowl. But a lot of teaching going on today, a lot of foundational drills, especially with the linebackers. Saw them working on footwork and then eye discipline. So Matt Enns said they wanted to work on that foundation, so we're seeing that on day one of spring camp.
And what has Danton Lynn said all offseason? I'm a teacher. I want to be a teacher, teaching. So I co-sign to what you're saying there. It's cool to see him working with some of the younger guys. After practice, we heard from Lincoln Riley, Dennis Simmons, and a bunch of players on offense. A couple things from Lincoln Riley off the top. Naming Luke Heward the quarterback coach has allowed Riley to do more things with the team. He's not spending as much time with the QBs. He's been in more defensive install meetings, and he's just been able to oversee the program a little bit more. And the great coaches, I think a lot of them have the defensive backgrounds, but they're also great CEOs, and I think Riley, of course, he has an offensive background. That's not going to change, but developing more into a CEO, that seems to be important for him this offseason, so that was a significant takeaway. And then 2 things about depth. He talked about the offensive tackle, the unit, or those players on the right and the left side. He likes what they have there, but the depth isn't great. He thinks the quality is good, but the quantity isn't right now, so maybe they'll look to add a tackle from the transfer portal. And then Dennis Simmons had the same thing to say about the receiver room. It's a lot smaller than last year. At this time last year, there were 11 receivers in the room. Right now, there are 7, so I think USC is going to look to add a receiver in the spring transfer portal window as well. Simmons said, without a shadow of a doubt, we're going to do that. So I don't know if they'll add one, but they'll certainly look. Those were 3 of the biggest takeaways for me, but we heard from some players as well, Riley and Simmons. Anything else stick out to you, Chris, from the coaches, or do you want to move to the players?
Well, just a quick take on what Riley said, moving Heward to QB coaches. He said it was something they thought about doing last season, but they didn't, quote, pull the trigger on it, and how it will allow him to bump around and jump to different position groups. But he did say, I'm still going to be working with the QBs. That's his baby. Even joked, someone asked him if it was hard to give it up or see someone else, working.
Shout out Antonio.
Antonio Morales from The Athletic for asking him, got to laugh out of him. But yeah, so obviously Lincoln Riley's a QB whisperer, but he needs to put his handprints all over the rest of the team. And, he was open about, being in different meeting rooms. Sometimes I want to go to the O-line room. I want to sit in on these defensive meetings because, like the players, he's learning this scheme for himself. He said, he is learning it like them. He has he's further ahead than the players, but he's now learning the finer details of the scheme, which I think says a lot. He's an offensive guy, but he still wants to know the ins and outs of this Danton Lynn scheme, which is, going to fuel a potential turnaround for USC, going into the Big Ten in 2024.
And what does that say to the people who say Lincoln Riley doesn't know defense crowd? Lincoln's learning too. He's taking the time to learn Danton Lynn's defense, and he's been so adamant this offseason, we can play good defense at USC. It's going to happen, and I think the fact that he's learning from Danton Lynn is, of course, huge, and that's going to help USC going forward as well. And Riley obviously knows a ton about the defensive side of the ball as well, and he's, I'm sure, passing along notes and doing stuff with the defensive players. But it's just interesting. He's told us multiple times in the last few months when we've had a chance to talk to him, he's doing more on defense. So he's learning from Lynn. He's giving Lynn his input, giving the players his input a little bit. It's more of a team effort, and I think that should help. How about some of the players? Miller Moss, Jonah Monheim, Elijah Page. I talked to Makai Lemon. What stood out from your conversations with some of those guys?
Well, first, happy birthday to Miller Moss. It was his birthday today. Got to interview him on his birthday. That doesn't always line up for the most part, but Miller Moss, very cool, calm, and collected. Very open to the QB competition. He knows that's going to make it better. Jaden Mayava coming in here from UNLV, a young QB, 6'4", big arm. That was some of the things that Zachariah Brand said about Mayava having a big arm. But, this is going to be a QB competition. He's going to have to really, truly earn that number one QB spot. But, we haven't heard anything different that says that, Miller Moss won't be the QB1 for next season. He's got all the confidence. We feel like he has the locker room behind him. We certainly has the fan base behind them. But, Miller Moss isn't a guy who's going to, say he's the QB1. He's going to go out there and earn it and play and do a competition for it. So, he's very, straight-laced. He did say that he wanted to put his DNA in this team. I think that was kind of the big talking point or big thing I got from his interview. And someone followed up, like, what does a Miller Moss DNA-infused team look like? And he said, we'll find out. We're going to find out. So what I think that is a tough, hardworking team. He didn't say those things, but just, having covered Miller a while, that's going to be the foundation of a team, that has his influence on it.
We heard from Jonah Monheim, who's going to move to center. Lincoln Riley announced last night Elijah Page, who we're not exactly sure where he'll line up, but it seems like left tackle for him right now, the way the roster's constructed. And both of those guys really didn't give too many insights into what the offensive line is going to look like. I remember Monheim talked about how Brett Nealon's been back on campus, the old center for USC, who was with the program 2 years ago, got hurt in the Pac-12 championship against Utah, and then he wasn't able to participate in Pro Day last year, so he's going to participate in Pro Day this year. He's been back on campus to help Jonah figure out center, so that's been helpful. But Elijah Page seemed really professional, and I didn't really take away much from what he had to say. More so, like, he's a redshirt freshman. That might make you a little scary if he's potentially playing left tackle, but he looked massive to me when we were talking to him, and just the scrum. I mean, all the guys tower over the media people, but I didn't really remember him looking huge walking out of the tunnel. Maybe I was on my phone or something, but when we were talking to him, I was like, okay, he's young, but I think this guy could play left tackle if he puts his best foot forward and earns it. His body certainly looks like a left tackle to me.
To be fair, we are not the tallest reporters out there. People constantly ask in the comments who is taller between us, so that's not saying much, but yes, legit 6'7", 317 pounds, I believe. He's gained about 6 pounds since last season, so he's putting on the weight. Yeah, he looks great. I mean, he is legitimate 6'7". He is what you look for in a tackle body. Long, tall, has the frame to put on more weight. So, yeah, is it the year of Elijah Page at left tackle? We don't know. USC, I really think they need to get somebody out of the portal. I know. Lincoln Riley kind of hemmed in, like, oh, we'll explore it, but I think their plans are definitely bring somebody in because they need more offensive tackle depth with Monheim moving to center. And Miller Moss was very complimentary of Jonah Monheim. He's a very smart player, and he said he's very cerebral, and he's made that transition for him. Them working together as the center and quarterback very, very easy. Jonah Monheim's a smart kid. His future is on the interior. He's not going to be a tackle at the NFL level, so this will help his draft stock. But I'm kind of iffy on the move because he's a great left tackle, really good right tackle, so it's a risky gamble, but they need to bring in more help at offensive tackle.
If he was still left tackle, maybe would he have said, I don't want to come back. If I'm coming back, I got to be a center.
Yeah, I think, you're looking long-term.
Or a guard.
Yeah, long-term, I think you're just looking what's best for him and his development at the next level. He's not going to play left tackle at the NFL level. He might play right tackle, but his projection is at interior, so he needed to play interior for this season. So it makes sense from a long term. You want to do right by him and get him that film. But now USC has a hole to fill. Is that Elijah Page? Is that Mason Murphy? Is that someone to be named out of the portal? We'll have to see.
Chris, we wanted this to be 10 minutes. It's approaching 15 minutes, so let's wrap it up there. For Chris Trevino, I'm Connor Morrissette. This has been Instant Analysis from USC's first spring practice of 2024. We will be back Thursday for another Instant Analysis after practice number 2. Stick with USCFootball.com for full coverage throughout the week, and we'll see you next time.